The Battle of Brandywine was fought on this day 243 years ago. It was the largest single-day land engagement of the American Revolution, where approximately 12,000 soldiers in General George Washington's Continental Army fought against approximately 18,000 Crown forces under General Sir William Howe. Howe's objective was to defeat Washington in one decisive battle and capture the colonial capital of Philadelphia, thus bringing an abrupt end to the American Revolution that was only in its second year. General Howe started the day in Kennett Square, where he had arrived on September 10, 1777, after marching from the Head of Elk in Maryland and through northern Delaware. General Washington, who had arrived in the Chadds Ford area on September 9, 1777, knew of General Howe's location and anticipated an attack where the main road to Philadelphia crossed the Brandywine River at Chadds Ford. He placed defenses on the eastern heights at Chadds Ford, along with several other fords to the north and south. Lacking intelligence and having poor knowledge of the terrain, Washington failed to guard two of the most northern fords, Trimble's and Jeffrey's, on the forks of the Brandywine that were located approximately 8 miles above Chadds Ford. This would ultimately become Washington's blunder. General Howe, aided by local guides, knew of this blunder and devised his battle plan accordingly. Forming his army into 2 columns, his objective was to send Hessian General Wilhelm von Kniphausen with approximately 7,500 soldiers to create a feint at Washington's main position at Chadds Ford. Meanwhile, Generals Howe and Cornwallis would lead the remaining soldiers north on a 15-mile outflanking march to cross the unguarded northern fords and attack Washington from the rear. All in all, this was the decisive battle in Howe's mind that would defeat Washington's army for good. From 6 a.m. until the afternoon hours, General Kniphausen distracted Washington's forces at Chadds Ford to allow Generals Howe and Cornwallis the ability to complete their movement. During this time, Washington was unsure if he had the entire Crown Force army in front of him at Chadds Ford or if there was another body of the enemy elsewhere. This was due to conflicting intelligence reports that he had been receiving from his scouts throughout the morning and into the afternoon. These conflicting intelligence reports would lead to Washington's defeat at Brandywine. It was not until approximately 2 p.m. that Washington had finally gotten confirmation that there was in fact a larger body of the enemy behind his lines to the north. In learning this, he immediately dispatched 2 divisions under Generals William Alexander Sterling and Adam Stephen to counter the attack. He would then attach a 3rd division under John Sullivan, who had orders to link up with Sterling and Stephen. Generals Sterling and Stephen formed as one defensive battle line on a piece of high ground known as Birmingham Hill. But due to poor terrain, General Sullivan formed too far left of their divisions. This caused a major gap in the American line, which would lead to mass confusion among the Continental troops. Across from these divisions was the cream of Howe's Crown forces, which consisted of the highly trained British Royal Guards, British Grenadiers, British Light Infantry, Hessian Grenadiers, and Hessian Jaegers. At approximately 4 p.m., after allowing his troops to rest following a strenuous march, the British general launched his attack. What ensued for approximately an hour and a half after that order was given was some of the heaviest fighting of the American Revolution. Because of the confusion with Sullivan's men, they were routed off the field quickly by the elite Royal Guards. The Grenadiers and the British Light Infantry had a more difficult time attacking Sterling and Stephen's positions, as they had the high ground of Birmingham Hill in their favor. British officer Lieutenant Richard St. George of the 52nd Light Infantry was in the attack against Stephen's position, who held their ground bravely atop Birmingham Hill. St. George later recalled the following from the battle.
With excessive fatigue, from 4 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock at night, we marched, we fought. 'Twas like the battles of Covent Garden and Drury Lane. There was incessant fighting and yelling, incline right, incline left, halt, advance. The cannonballs plowed the ground around us. The musket balls, the grape shot, shed the leaves from the trees as if it was autumn. The generals, General Howe was master of the field. General Washington, he had none. We took 8 of his cannons, 6 of them brass, 2 of the iron, and a howitzer. I also did find myself a very nice hunting cap that I wear in my tent in the evenings in the summer. Also, a musket ball did graze my ankle and contuse it at Brandywine.
Eventually, all 3 Continental Divisions on Birmingham Hill were forced to fall back due to the overwhelming force of Howe's elite soldiers. Meanwhile, at Chadsford, it was a similar situation. As Howe and Cornwallis launched their attack to the north, Kniphausen was finally crossing the river as he now knew that his cue had come. General Anthony Wayne and his Pennsylvanians, General William Maxwell and his light infantry, and General Armstrong's militia were left to counter this attack, but were quickly overwhelmed. They were forced to fall back down the Great Nottingham Road, or modern U.S. Route 1. Colonel James Chamberlain of the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment gave this account of that experience.
General Wayne sent orders for artillery to retreat. It was on my right and ordered me to cover it with my part of the regiment. It was done, but to my surprise, the artillerymen had run and left the howitzer behind. 2 pieces went up the road, protected by about 60 of my men who had very warm work, but brought them safe. I then ordered another party to fly to the howitzer and bring it off. They went immediately to the gun, and the men followed their example, and I covered them with the few I had remaining. But before this could be done, the main body of the foe came within 30 yards and kept up the most terrible fire I suppose ever heard in America, though with very little loss on our side. A colored man had charge of an ammunition wagon attached to Colonel Proctor's regiment. An order was given by the proper officers to have charge of the wagons to abandon them to the enemy and save themselves in flight.
The quote-unquote colored man that Colonel James Chamberlain described was none other than Edward Ned Hector, a bombardier and teamster in Thomas Proctor's artillery company who was positioned on the eastern heights of the Brandywine. Tonight, Ned Hector joins us to describe his experience at the Battle of Brandywine and to give us a perspective through his eyes.
My name is Edward Hector. The last thing that I recall is that I was at the Battle of Brandywine. You see, our spies had learned information that the Redcoats had landed at a place called the Head of Elk down in Maryland, and that they were marching up the pike that goes to Baltimore, which is also the road that goes to Philadelphia as well. Eventually, it becomes quite obvious where they're heading towards. They're heading towards Philadelphia, our nation's capital. I'm sure they think, if they can capture Philadelphia, capture the Continental Congress, execute them for being traitors, they could put an end to this little rebellion of ours. To prevent this from happening, General Washington was sent 20 miles west of Philadelphia to the Brandywine River. His plan was quite simple. Every place that you could cross that river by way of foot, he placed armies. Sound like a good plan to you? Indeed, it did sound like a good plan. Unfortunately, there were problems. As the British were approaching, and we were finally realizing where they were heading towards, we were sent to the Chad area, and we were told to set up defenses. We arrived the night before. It's pouring rain. Now, I don't know if you understand how the weather is here in Pennsylvania, but sometimes it just seems like the skies just open up and drops. Tonight is one of those nights. It's coming down. It's coming down. The road is thick with mud. We're having a hard time pulling our wagons, our cannons, our horses through this mire and muck. But we do manage to get to Mr. Chad's house. We haul our cannons up the hill. We dig them into position. We get them prepared. We're getting ready for the battle the next day. We work all through the night. We go to bed without anything to eat. The next morning, as I recall, there was a slight fog that settled across the river that morning. We get up, we prepare ourselves for the battle. I remember that one of our officers managed to find a tongue of meat, or buy one from one of the farmers. We caught up one of the camp followers who brought up a Dutch oven and was busily preparing something for us to eat. can you smell that? Oh, at last we're going to get something to eat. Well, as we go on and we set ourselves up, we have patrols going on, and eventually we started noticing activity on this other side of the river. Next thing we know, firing, musket fire, cannon shots. One of the cannonballs actually sails over our heads. And of all the places for it to strike, the Dutch oven, where our food was, blowing at the bits. Fortunately, the camp follower, she was okay. She stormed back. But now we begin to battle without anything to eat. And of course, since they were firing upon us, being the gentlemen that we are, we return fire in kind. For us, the battle begins. You can hear the sound in the fog below, but that's not what's bothering us. You know what's bothering us? As the day goes on, not only do we hear the sound of fighting in front of us, we start hearing something odd. We start hearing the sound of fighting behind us. You remember that plan I told you about, General Washington? About blocking all the places that you could cross? Well, there's some information that we did not have at our disposal at the time. As they are coming up towards us, towards the Chadds Ford area, before they reach us, they stop at a place called Kennett. And there they do something we don't expect. They split their forces into two. Half of them are sent to the Chadds Ford area with the orders to amuse the Americans. The other half, they're marching behind the lines northward. Understand this, they know that if they go up about 5 or 6 miles after the river forks, there are 2 other places the river can be crossed. We have no idea that those 2 places exist. Actually, a man comes riding down from the north. He wants to talk to General Washington. My understanding, as he's talking to General Washington, he apprises him that something had happened up here in the north area near the meeting house. That there was a goodly number of redcoats up there, cannons and all. General Washington dismisses this. Throughout the day, he's receiving mixed messages. One moment he hears there's a large body of redcoats marching northward. Next, nothing. There is no such thing, no evidence of such thing. And then again he hears it again, and then again, no such thing. Now we're starting to hear the sound of fighting northward and behind us. This is what's worrying me. Do you know what happens when you have fighting in front of you and you have fighting behind you? You know what's getting ready to happen to you? You're getting ready to be surrounded. I mean, think for yourself. Does an army ever want to be surrounded by the enemy? Of course not. Well, we're managing to keep them across the river, but eventually they find a way across. About 200 yards south of our position, a couple units managed to get across the river. They circle down below our hill. Now, please, make no mistake. We chose this hill deliberately. It has a great command of the battlefield. You can see for a goodly distance off. However, you cannot see the foot of the hill. You ever been up on a hill like that, where you could see out real well, but you can't see what's going on down at the bottom? That is the situation that we were in. Now, at Mr. Chadd's house, after we had dug in the cans and got ready, I had noticed that about 30 yards back that there was some sort of orchard or some grove of trees. Imagine our astonishment when out of that orchard, out comes the redcoats, bayonets fixed, advancing on our position. You know what they're going to do with that bayonet, don't you? Yes, They're going to use them on us. 30 yards. 30 yards. 30 yards isn't that far. We don't have enough time to take and turn our cannons around to defend ourselves. So the order is given. Abandon your horses. Abandon your wagons. Retreat down towards Chester. Regroup. Get ready for a counterattack. What? Abandon my horse and wagons? Abandon my cannons? Ha! How can I do this? After all, I am a teamster. Not only that, I'm proud to tell you that I am a bombardier. Why are you looking at me like that? Don't you know what a teamster or bombardier is? Oh, you don't? Oh, well then, very well. As a teamster, I drive a wagon and a team of horses. Now, I'm not a baggage teamster. I'm not hauling around supplies and things like that. I am hauling in my wagon gunpowder, ammunition. In fact, behind one of my wagons, I'm pulling one of the cannons. Part of my job is to set up the cannon, get it into position, fill up the ammunition box in the back, and then I fall into one of the 3 rear positions of the cannon. When I'm not working for Washington's Army, I transport goods for people. As a bombardier, I man one of the 3 rear positions of the cannon. There's a person here, 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 and back on the ammunition box. This position, and the ammunition box are bombardier's position. I can tend to any of those positions. They're advancing on us. I remember thinking, never shall I have my team. I will save my horses and myself. And so instead of going in the direction of Chester, I chose to go in the direction behind the hill where my wagon was. I managed to make it past the redcoats. I got to my wagon. I grabbed what falling guns I could. I heaved them up into the wagon. I grabbed my horse and wagon, and I led them off to safety. We lost half our supplies in the Battle of Brandywine, but not my wagon, not my horses. Yes, they ended up capturing our 4 cannons up on that hill, but they did not capture the supplies that I was responsible for. Yes, they won the battle, but you know what? We stood against one of the best armies in the world. And I have you know that we fought them from sun up to sunset. In fact, we fought them so hard that when we retreated, they chose not to pursue us. Not bad for a bunch of farmers, merchants. Well, I'm sure their next move is to head towards Philadelphia. I hope we bought them enough time to evacuate. I guess only time will tell. Very well then. I am, and always will be, your most humble and devoted servant, Edward Hector.
As the day looked bleak for General Washington due to the overwhelming fighting on 2 fronts, he began to withdraw his army from the field. To cover this withdrawal, he ordered General Nathaniel Greene to create a rearguard defense as the rest of the army fell back to the east. General Greene's defense, along with cavalry officer Count Casimir Pulaski's makeshift cavalry charge, brought the British pursuit to a grinding halt, which allowed the Continental Army to successfully escape. Due to the fatigue of his soldiers and night rapidly setting in, General Howe did not pursue Washington's army, but instead camped his army around the village of Dilworth. There, they remained for 5 days following the battle. During that time, his army had a devastating impact on the local landscape and population. A Quaker man by the name of Joseph Townsend was 21 years old in 1777. In 1841, he wrote an account of his experiences during the Battle of Brandywine, as he was there to witness the prelude, the combat, and the aftermath of the engagement. He was a member of the Birmingham Friends Meeting, a Quaker place of worship that was taken over by the Americans before the battle as a field hospital, as well as the British following the battle. Townsend described the British occupation as such.
We had the full opportunity of beholding the destruction and the wanton waste committed on the property of the peaceful inhabitants of the neighborhood and on the ground of the encampment. Those who were obliged to remain had their stock of cattle destroyed for the use of the army, their houses taken away, and their household furniture, bedding, etc. wantonly wasted and burned. It was not uncommon to see heaps of feathers lying about the farms, the ticks having been stripped off and used of, and the remains of small pieces of valuable furniture which lay about their fireplaces in the fields, unconsumed, when there was no want of timber or fence rails that might have been used for their cooking. Being in an enemy's country, inhabited by rebels, there was no restraint on the soldiery or the rabble who accompanied them.
We will now go to the Birmingham Friends Meeting House and hear remarks from Bobby McMullen, who was a past Vice President General of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution, as well as a past Pennsylvania State Regent.
Today, Patriot Day 2020, we, the members of Chester County Chapter DAR, meet at this hallowed ground at the Birmingham Meeting House, Chester County, Pennsylvania. We meet to remember those that lost their lives during the September 11th attacks of 2001, and also those that fought and died on September 11th, 1777 at the Battle of Brandywine. All these patriots, centuries apart, gave of themselves to secure and maintain the freedoms we have today. More troops fought at Brandywine than any other battle of the American Revolution, with it also being the longest single-day battle of the war, with continuous fighting for 11 hours. The morning of September 11, 1777, 9,000 British soldiers flanked George Washington's forces just north of this meeting house, with the Continentals taking up a defensive position behind the stone walls of the cemetery. There were heavy casualties on both sides. At the end of the fighting, the meeting house was used as a field hospital. As typical with 18th century warfare, fallen soldiers were buried nearby where they fell. Some of the dead from the British, Hessian, and Continental armies were buried in this mass grave within the walls of the burial ground of the meeting house, marked today with a memorial stone and peace garden. The Battle of Brandywine was a severe loss for Washington's troops, with his retreat to Valley Forge for the winter and the British occupying the city of Philadelphia. As members of the Daughters of the American Revolution, we each descend from a patriot of the Revolutionary War. Some of our Chester County Chapter DAR members have a connection to the Battle of Brandywine. Ancestors fighting in the battle, and ancestors owning land encompassed by the battle, including the Linden Farm. Melinda Marshall Hoops, the founder of Chester County Chapter DAR's great-grandfather, Joseph C. McClellan, captain of the 9th Pennsylvania Regiment, fought along Lafayette at the Birmingham and was wounded. We will always remember the sacrifices made in defense of our people, our country, and our freedom. Today, we should pray for those who fight for our freedom, and also for the families of those whose lives were given to pay for this liberty that we enjoy. In the words of George Washington, Almighty God, we make our earnest prayer that Thou will keep the United States in Thy holy protection, that Thou will incline the hearts of the citizens to cultivate a spirit of subordination and obedience to the government, and entertain a brotherly affection and love for one another and for our fellow citizens of the United States at large. And finally, thou wilt most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to do justice, to love mercy, and to demean ourselves with that charity, humility, and pacific temper of mind, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, without a humble intimidation, or whose example in these we can never hope to be a happy nation. Grant our supplication, we beseech thee, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
We are honored to also have as a distinguished guest this evening, United States Representative Chrissy Houlihan.
Hi everyone, I'm Chrissy Houlihan and I represent our community in Congress. Today marks a very somber day for our nation and community as we reflect on the anniversary of the Battle of Brandywine. For those of you who don't know, the Battle of Brandywine was a historic fight during the American Revolution, the longest single-day battle of the war, in fact. More troops fought at the Battle of Brandywine than any other battle during the American Revolution. Fought on September 11th, 1777, this battle was a huge blow to the American war effort, resulting in a major British victory and allowing General Howe to capture the city of Philadelphia just 5 days after the battle's end. The Battle of Brandywine made it clear that the price of our freedom is high. Those brave soldiers gave their lives so that we might one day be a nation free from tyranny and oppression. And while we ultimately lost that battle, their lives were certainly not lost in vain, as we finally claimed victory over the British troops on September 3rd, 1783. As an Air Force veteran, I know firsthand the hardships and sacrifices endured by our armed service members and their families. And while many things have changed since the American Revolution, one thing has certainly remained the same. Serving our nation is not easy. It requires immense sacrifice, both by the service members and by their families. And sometimes it means making the ultimate sacrifice by giving your life to protect our freedom and our way of life. No matter what anyone says, these brave Americans are our heroes. Therefore, as we reflect on the events that took place at Brandywine Battlefield 243 years ago, let us strive to remember that even in our darkest days, there is always hope. That we can all continue to honor the lives lost on this day in the name of freedom by working to create innovative solutions and not more problems. That we should be building each other up and not tearing each other down. That we can work collaboratively to fix issues that ensure that all citizens have equal rights and equal access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that we never stop trying to achieve that more perfect union. The Battle of Brandywine marks a tragic day in our nation's history. Yet, just as we are now facing tragedies and crises, we must remember our power to continue to have the ability to overcome, to continue to seek progress and justice. Those soldiers fought for a country that they believe in, and today we have the power and responsibility to do the same. We are all in this together. Thank you.
In solemn commemoration of those who lost their lives in the Battle of Brandywine, as well as the 2001 terrorist attacks, we ask that you please join us in a moment of silence.
Present arms. Arms. Present. Arms. Shoulder. Arms.
Thank you. Following the Battle of Brandywine, General George Washington wrote to John Hancock, the President of the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. In his letter, he gave a summary of the day, as well as encouraging remarks describing the attitude of his men following the engagement. The letter reads,
Chester, September 11th, 1777, 12 o'clock at night. Sir, I am sorry to inform you that in this day's engagement, we have been obliged to leave the enemy masters of the field. Unfortunately, the intelligence received of the enemy's advance up the Brandywine and crossing at the ford about 6 miles above us was uncertain and contradictory, notwithstanding all my pains to get the best. This prevented my making a disposition adequate to the force with which the enemy attacked us on our right, in consequence of which the troops first engaged were obliged to retire before they could be reinforced. In the midst of this attack on the right, that body of the enemy which remained on the other side of Chad's Ford crossed it and attacked the division there under the command of General Wayne and the light troops under General Maxwell, who after a severe conflict also retired. The militia under the command of General Armstrong, being posted at the ford about 2 miles below Chad's, had no opportunity of engaging. But though we fought under many disadvantages and were from the causes above mentioned obliged to retire, yet our loss of men is not, I am persuaded, very considerable. I believe much less than the enemy. We have also lost 7 or 8 pieces of cannon, according to the best information I can at present obtain. The baggage, having been previously moved off, is all secure, saving the men's blankets, which being at their backs, many of them doubtless are lost. I have directed all the troops to assemble behind Chester, where they are now arranging for this night. Notwithstanding the misfortunes of the day, I am happy to find the troops in good spirits, and I hope another time we shall compensate for the losses now sustained. The Marquis de Lafayette was wounded in the leg and General Woodford in the hand. Divers other officers were wounded and some slain, but the numbers of either cannot now be ascertained. I have the honor to be, sir, your most obedient, humble servant, George Washington. Postscript. It has not been my power to send you earlier intelligence, the present being the first leisure moment I have had since the action.
As one can see, the Battle of Brandywine was a defeat for Washington and his Continental Army, but given the circumstances of the day, the soldiers knew they had adapted to the situation and had overcome the best they could. The army was still intact and would live to fight another day. Eventually, the following winter, they would transform into a professional fighting force at Valley Forge, and 6 long years later finally earn America's independence. In both 1777 and 2001, Americans were faced with a difficult challenge, but adapted and sustained. These are lessons that can be taught and learned from still today. On behalf of the Brandywine Battlefield Park Associates, I would like to thank you for joining us this evening. We would like to thank Representative Chrissy Houlihan and Bobby McMullen, along with the Chester County chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution for their remarks, as well as Noah Lewis, Randall Spackman and Thornberry Farm, Kevin Diestelow, and Sam Schmidhumer for their assistance. We hope you all enjoyed the program and wish you and yours the best. Please stay safe and take care.